In this video, I am going to try to demonstrate how it's possible to use a single 1/35th scale Masterbox figure kit to create almost any female character you could possibly imagine. With a little cutting and sanding, all of the body parts in this kit are interchangeable, and a little effort and imagination will give you a tremendous amount of creative freedom. To demonstrate this, I am going to try to create a classic femme fatale character from the classic film noir, Gilda. So to introduce both the character and the movie, I am going to hand the mic over to fellow film noir buff Sydney at the Cinema City's YouTube channel. Link in the description.
"1946's Gilda features Rita Hayworth in the title role as the enigmatic and alluring woman with a past. Directed by Charles Vidor and set against a backdrop of espionage and intrigue in post-war Argentina, Gilda is a story of passion, obsession, and the dangerous line between love and hate. Played by Rita Hayworth, Gilda is a woman whose beauty is both a blessing and a curse. And there is a sense that she has a past, and in that past, she's used her beauty and sexuality to survive. Initially defined by her relationships with two men.
This is Johnny Farrell. Johnny, this is Gilda. Gilda is my wife, Johnny.
Both men attempt to pin her down and refuse to see or acknowledge her as a complex woman with deep emotional needs and a very strong independent streak. She manages to defy them in her own way, and one iconic scene, is representative of that defiance. And it's a scene that made Rita Hayworth a superstar. But in the context of the film and the character, this scene is an important moment. Besides being a show-stopping, scorching hot musical number, it symbolizes Gilda's defiance of a world where the men around her wield all the power and control. She sings, "Put the blame on Mame."
Boy, put the blame on Mame.
A song about a woman, Mame, whose sexuality carries such power it causes chaos and catastrophe. Her kiss ignites the Great Chicago Fire. Her dancing sets off the apocalyptic 1906 San Francisco earthquake.
One night she started to shim and shake. That brought on the Frisco quake.
In the number, Hayworth is costumed in a black satin strapless dress and long gloves, designed by Jean-Louis. She mesmerizes everyone. She is in control of the room, but most importantly, she is in control of the men. You believe that she could, with the flick of her hair, trigger an earthquake or an avalanche. She, in that moment, is Mame.
The first thing to do is to select the body parts you need to achieve the pose you want the figure to take. For Gilda, I took a torso and a leg. For projects like this, I like to twist the parts off the sprue. Nothing here really needs to be perfect, since everything's going to be cut into smaller pieces later on. This part of the process, it's a bit like jamming puzzle pieces together and hoping that they're going to fit. After I picked out the parts that I wanted, I lined them up just to see how they're going to fit together when I posed them. At around this point, I decided to make her left leg out of milliput, which is why that wire's there. That way I can use the milliput to build the shape that I want, so that I can lay the dress down around it. And then once I was happy with how everything was laid out, I was ready to start some surgery. Since I plan to be pinning everything together with wire, I start by drilling holes in all the parts that I'll be using for this project. The wire also helps with test fitting, and it makes it easier to make sure that all the pieces fit together in a way that makes sense. It's always good to check the fit from as many angles as possible before committing to anything. The right leg is going to be cut at both the hip and the knee to bend it into the pose that I want. I like to use brush tip markers to sketch out where I'm going to make my cuts. I feel like it's a good practice, and as long as the inks in your markers are water-based, they won't affect anything when it comes time to paint. After I mapped everything out, I cut the leg into sections at the knee and the hip. I decided not to cut through the ankle after I marked it because it didn't really feel like it was necessary. I drilled all the way through the hip and thigh sections of the leg. This made it possible to feed a wire all the way through it, making the leg fully posable like an action figure. Doing this gives me the chance to experiment with the pose before committing to it. It's always good to look at everything from every angle before making any final decisions. Once you've found a pose that you're happy with, it's time to cement the plastic pieces together and fill in the gaps with Milliput. Milliput is an ideal gap filler. A little water is enough to make it spreadable and allow you to create a very smooth texture while the putty's still wet. Since the right leg wasn't going to be visible in the completed figure, I decided to make it from scratch out of green stuff and Milliput, which I formed around a length of wire. The first step in building the dress is to lay down a foundation. I like to place some Milliput around the legs to help add some structure and define the final shape the dress is going to take. Once this was done, I mixed up some green stuff and let it rest for about an hour before rolling it flat and cutting it out into the shapes that I wanted. It's really important to let the green stuff rest. This just makes it much easier to work with when you start constructing the dress. The next step was to drape the green stuff on the figure and form it around her body to make a dress. Don't worry too much about getting fingerprints on the putty. If you brush on some rubbing alcohol, you should be able to smooth everything out. I used a silicone tip shaper to get the folds and wrinkles just the way I wanted them. Any imperfections can be smoothed out with a little white Milliput once the green stuff is dried. I also used this approach to help form the bottom of the dress just to make sure that the hemline just had the right shape to it. To make the upper half of the dress, I mixed green stuff and Milliput to make a putty that's easier to spread and form around her torso. Now this mixture really combines the best properties of both putties to make a material that's not too sticky, but not too doughy either. And it's extremely easy to work with. It's also sandable and carvable once it's cured. I like to use both a silicone shaper and metal dentist tools when I work with this material. For the hair, I use the same green stuff and Milliput mixture that I used to make the upper half of the dress. Hair has to be done in stages, especially for longer or more elaborate hairstyles. For Gilda, I did this in 3 steps, starting with the right, then the back, and then the left-hand side of her head. To make the arms, I drilled a hole down the length of the limb, cut each arm in half at the elbow, and fed a piece of wire through it. This allowed me to bend them until I was able to achieve Rita Hayworth's iconic pose from the film. Once I was satisfied with the pose, I mixed some green stuff and Milliput together and did some reconstructive surgery on our shoulders and elbows. The glove on our left hand was sculpted using the same green stuff and Milliput mixture. Now going into this project, I knew that the biggest challenge for me was going to be in sculpting the bow on Gilda's left hip. Now the first thing to do was to map out where the bow was going to go and how to get the proportions correct. Once I felt confident about what I needed to do, I rolled out some green stuff and cut pieces into the shapes that I wanted and folded them into place. When using green stuff in this way, it is important to let the material rest a while before working with it. I allowed the putty to sit for about an hour before attempting the bow. The glove that she holds over her head was made with green stuff using the exact same method. Getting it into position was a minor challenge, but with some patience, I managed to get it into place. Before I finish, I need to say a word about the manufacturer. Masterbox is a Ukrainian company, and like many other model companies from that country, such as ICM and MiniArt, have continued to put out some amazing model kits, even as the war rages on. What they have achieved is incredible. This pinup kit, in particular, is a great tool for anyone who wants to learn figure conversions or sculpting. I also need to thank a few people. Firstly, I'd like to thank Sydney of Cinema City's channel for recording an intro to the character. She has a great channel that is a source of tons of great film noir recommendations. I also need to thank Zambies Decays for agreeing to collaborate with me on this figure and paint her. She is an excellent figure painter and has a wonderful miniature painting channel. You can find a link to both of these channels in the description. Overall, I'd say that this has been a really fun project to work on, and I really enjoyed taking on the challenge of sculpting an iconic character like Gilda.